I'm Jason Iasatis. This is Outside the Box again, and I've got a great, absolute honour tonight. My favourite man of all time is David Icke, and he's joining me from Brixham in London. David's doing the Brixham Academy on Saturday. If there's tickets left, go, whatever you do. Thanks for joining me today, David. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Jason.
Fantastic, always a joy. And I know I keep saying how wonderful I think you are, but I've got to say it. I believe David Icke here is going to be a Martin Luther King Gandhi, and already is actually. In years to come, I think people are going to really look back and think, wow, it's incredible what this man's done. And I really mean that. David has talked for years and years about this kind of thing, problem, reaction, solution, and where we're going and the agenda and where it's taken us with the EU. I was watching some of your old programs today, David, and thinking, wow, of course he's been warning us for ages and no one's been listening. And now's a chance. Let me tell you, David's going to do a quick talk here about why you mustn't, whatever you do, vote to stay in, and you must vote to stay out, for, if not you, for your children, your grandchildren, and people who aren't born yet. Very serious issue. We've got the usual players organising it all, and when you're in a prison, sometimes you get a little hole in the fence, and you get a chance to escape, and then the generations to follow can get out. But so many times, David, over the years, prisoners in proper prisons have stayed in because of the fear of what's beyond the fence. And that fence and that wall is going to come in, and it's going to crush us, and it's going to really, really hurt us. And we might only get this one chance to get out. So, David, I'll shut up. You know me, I do keep ranting on. I'll show you a book later on, The Phantom Self, which everyone must get. Tell everybody, David, please. And one more thing. People say, oh, well, David's just scaring people like we're talking that Cameron and all the EU people are scaring us. Quick thing from me. Fear is very healthy, some fear, and there's unhealthy fear. From the other camp for staying, it's unhealthy fear. From David's camp here to get out is healthy fear, because fear is good because it can stop you being eaten by a lion or run over by a truck. That's me done, David. Please convince everybody why we've got to get out.
Well, I'm not going to try to convince people. I'm going to say to people, look at the background, look at the evidence. And what you refer to there as good fear is actually being informed. If people knew the agenda of the European Union, and we're only part of the way there at the moment, then apart from the elites who benefit from the EU, no one would vote to stay in. That is how extreme, how extraordinary, and how fundamentally tyrannical this EU agenda is. And I've been investigating it, researching it, and tracking it for decades. And from its own documents and the statements of its advocates right from the start, it can be clearly shown that where we are now is where it was planned for us to be from day one. And I stress again, where we are now is only where we are now, not where this is meant to finish up. So when they started out, there had been a war in Europe to stop the Nazis creating their version of what's become the European Union. A pan-European centralized tyranny dictating to everybody in every country. If that had been suggested at that time after the war, then of course people who just fought, lost loved ones, been maimed for life by fighting the Nazis to stop, in effect, that pan-European control system coming into place, they, in response to, well, let us do it, now we've won the war, would have been beyond outrage. It would simply not have been able to be justified. People wouldn't have had it. So instead of that, because it's all this manipulation, all this global conspiracy at every level is a psychological manipulation. It's programming how people perceive situations so that they will see them and respond or agree to you responding in a way that suits your agenda. So don't tell them where you're going. Tell them what they'll accept. And what that was to start with, although there were steps even to this before Britain got involved, it was a free trade zone called the European Economic Community, or the Common Market. And we were told before Britain went in with the absolutely disgusting man called Ted Heath, Prime Minister at the time. The line was, it's just a free trade area. It's good for jobs, the old thing they always wheel out when they're trying to justify the unjustifiable. And that's the end of it. But from the start, and in their own public statements and in their private statements and in their publicly seeable documents, that was not the game at all. That was the foot in the door. The idea was then to pick off more and more power at the center until eventually there was a fully fledged, centralized bureaucratic dictatorship with no democratic checks and balances. And we're seeing that unfold. And like I say, we're only where we are now, not where it's meant to end up. So what did we see over the years? We saw step by step by step, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe. More and more power taken by the center, more and more power taken from sovereign nation states to the center, to the point where today, 55, 60%, some say more, of the rules, laws, and regulations that impose themselves on the fine detail of people's lives in this country do not come through debate in the Westminster Parliament, undemocratic as that is much of the time. It actually comes from bureaucrats in Brussels starting out the process of imposing their will upon the entirety of the European Union population. This has many devastating effects on people's freedom and fairness and justice, and even on the political system itself as it's perceived of one person, one vote, and the majority elect the government. Not that that is overwhelmingly true, but that's at least the perception and the foundation of what we call democracy. What has happened is the European Union's very existence and its bureaucratic control system has allowed transnational corporations something they could barely have dreamed of, although having said that, those that control those corporations are the very forces that created the European Union. So that does make it more than a dream. It makes it a cold, calculated intent from the start. But what it means for corporations is this. Before, if they were to get laws passed in a country that were beneficial for those corporations, they had to set about wheeling and dealing and manipulating and lobbying in each of the countries that they operated in. And that took a lot of time, it took a lot of money, a lot of effort, and the same had to happen in every country. Once the European Union bureaucracy was in place, the giant corporations had a one-stop shop. Now all they had to do was persuade the bureaucrats in Brussels to implement and trigger rules, laws, and regulations that the corporations wanted. And immediately, they were imposed on every country and every person in those countries throughout the European Union. And this is why there's a documentary on the internet that you can find on YouTube, which is about how corporations control the European Union through this bureaucracy. And it shows, not surprisingly, that the area around the European Commission, where the bureaucrats operate from, is like an explosion of offices of lobbying organizations working there on behalf of giant corporations. And where this has now taken us is to a point where we have this secret negotiation going on, which cannot be revealed to the public even by supposedly elected European members of the European Parliament, which is just there for no other reason than to give them the opportunity to say, oh, no, it is democratic. Look, we've got a parliament. Yeah, with no power, basically. We have this transatlantic trade and investment partnership, goes under the short name of TTIP, which is being negotiated between the European Union, which always means the bureaucrats, and the bureaucratic equivalent in the United States, and the corporations, and the lobbyists, which, if they get what they want, will bring about a situation whereby if a corporation considers that a decision or the implementation of a new law or regulation by a so-called sovereign government could affect their future profits, they will be able to take that government to basically a corporate court in the TTIP agreement that will allow that court to impose enormous fines on governments, i.e. the population of that country, even though all they've done, it does happen occasionally, is pass laws for the benefit of the people and for the benefit of the environment or whatever. And therefore, you look at something like the National Health Service. This is being run down and being made chaotic and inefficient now, systematically, to prepare public opinion and weaken public resistance to having it privatized. So that people say, well, I know they want to privatize it, but, well, it can't be any worse privatized than it is now. And this brings us back to TTIP, and it brings us back to the EU, because without being a member of the EU, we wouldn't come under TTIP. But if you are one of these giant global so-called healthcare corporations, then you could go to this court and say the state-owned National Health Service is affecting our potential profits. And it's not a level playing field because the National Health Service is subsidized by government. And this is the way it's going. It's plain to see for anybody. We are having a situation where, on behalf of the global pharmaceutical cartel, the scalpel, drug, chemotherapy, radiation, Stone Age medicine, which generates billions and billions from the ill health and suffering of others, is seeking to destroy all competition, to destroy, therefore, all alternatives and methods of healing that it doesn't control and own, i.e. basically much of the entirety of the complementary medicine, alternative to big pharma medicine arena.
And there's still a law, sorry David, isn't there still a law, 1930s law, that if you say you can cure anything, cancer with anything else other than chemotherapy and radiotherapy and drugs, you can be thrown in prison, as Noel Edmonds has just had a bashing about, yeah?
Yes, well, I've recorded a video about the Edmonds situation, which is on my website now, in which I point out why the makers of the machine he's talking about were very, very keen and immediately keen to distance themselves from what he said, because if they said, yes, we agree with him, they would be breaking the law. And so we are seeing this war on alternative health. I know, because I know people at the cutting edge of this and how much hassle they get from the authorities. Now, if we come out of the EU, and the EU is the vehicle through which this war on alternative health care is being waged, then we do not any longer remain subject to those laws destroying alternative health care. And to see the so-called Green Party, they're supposed to be the party of the people, the party of choice, the party of all these things, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Conservative Party wing of David Cameron and George Osborne. And for the Labour Party, which is supposed to be representing the interests of people who are not the elite, and the unions who are supposed to be doing the same, all standing shoulder to shoulder together, telling people to stay into a tyranny, is absolutely grotesque. It's testament to how many people are starting to disconnect from listening to politicians before they make up their opinions, and are starting to do their own research, follow their own judgment. And if that's different to the party they normally vote for, then so be it. And that's fantastic, because so many people, of course, from their personal experience, even if it's in their communities, in the workplace, whether they're small, medium-sized businesses, some even bigger, who have been deluged and many taken out of business by the tidal wave of regulation pouring out of Brussels and the bureaucracy. They've looked at all that and they've said, we want to come out, because that is our experience. Being in is a bad thing. And we're seeing, in a way, how close this vote appears to be, according to the opinion polls. Anyway, indeed, the Leave campaign is now quite consistently ahead. We're seeing this, hallelujah, brother and sister, disconnect between what the people decide and what the political class, and Labour, Greens, they're all the political class if you get down to it, what they're telling them they should do and how they should vote. And so where we are now is where we are. Where this is designed to go from here is to eventually have a Europe made up of regions, not many sovereign nation states, regions, which will be, in terms of power, like a county council is to the Westminster Parliament, in terms of its relationship with the bureaucracy in Brussels. And that there will be no nation states. And one of the things that's happening is the preparation for that. And it's called this mass migration of people into Europe. And this mass migration of people through Europe, through the open borders policy. See, if you're going to break up nation states, you have a massive point of resistance. And that is those people who self-identify with their particular culture, what people call nations. that is a major block when you come to breaking nations up into regions, because people don't want it. So what they're doing is diluting the sense of nationhood and the sense of culture by allowing vast numbers of people from other cultures to come in. This is not just people from outside, this is within Europe. And that is a classic case in this conspiracy of the people in the country and the people coming into the country both being used as pawns in the same game, while being played off against each other with conflict and what have you in many cases, when they're both actually pawns in the same game, and almost all of them in both groups don't understand that. And if you look at the countries of Europe and you look at the cultures who have still today the most sense of national cultural self-identity, one that stands out is Germany. And so Germany has been particularly targeted. This is why Chancellor Merkel, who is controlled by these people down to her DNA, and willingly so, by the way, that's why she's been in power for so long. That's why she shocked the German people by just opening the doors, not to refugees of Western wars, and I say quite right to that, in terms of what we should be doing to help people who are genuine refugees of wars that the West created and go on manipulating, but to anybody. And the reason they were shocked at that was because of context. If you don't have the context of how all this and why all this is happening and to what end, then what to people who've done the research is an open book. Oh, that's why they're doing that. It's confusing because it makes no sense to people who haven't got that research that's put that into context. And so when Time magazine made Angela Merkel Person of the Year, wow, very soon after that happened, and when George Soros, the Rothschild bagman billionaire, came out and said there should be 1 million migrants from outside the EU coming into the EU from the Middle East and Africa every year, these mansions must be full then. It was just the classic confirmation that this is the agenda. And of course, there are more countries due to come into the EU if we stay in, and therefore more people open to the open borders policy. And we're looking at diluting a sense of national identity, eventually in every country, so that the resistance to regionalization, which is you're destroying our culture, is gone, because there is no culture left that's identifiable. And so all these things are connected. And whether you're this or whether you're that, you're all pawns in the game of this hidden network, which is pursuing an agenda to transform European society into something that would have been unthinkable 5-10 years ago even. Never mind back when they started this process after the Second World War. In fact, the European Union has been step by step being put into place since way before the Second World War, back to at least the 1920s. And one of the great architects of it in the background was the Habsburg family, and particularly this guy Otto von Habsburg, who was the pump primer of the whole thing. And the Habsburgs and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and all these other bloodline families are the names that come to mind immediately when people say, well, who are the families involved in this network behind this global manipulation? So people need to get informed. It's so important that this process of people making their own judgments not saying, oh, say, well, let's listen to what he says, some politician or other, and then we'll listen to what she says, some politician or other, and then we'll decide who we think makes most sense. Forget it. Leave them to it. Do your own research, because most politicians, I mean, there are some key ones who are completely in the understanding of what's going on and why. People like Cameron, people like Osborne, etc. But the vast majority of politicians are just completely bloody ignorant of what they're talking about. It never ceases to amaze me when I have experience of politicians to see how unbelievably uninformed they are. And in the same way that if the public are not informed of the context and the background and the history and the real agenda of the EU, that leads them to vote in ways and support or not support things that otherwise they would if they had the context. That also applies to politicians. There is this misunderstanding, deep one, I would stress, that people like politicians and journalists are informed. They should be, but in truth, they're some of the most uninformed of all people. And thus, you're getting the blind leading the blind here. You're getting the blind saying, stay in, to people who've not done the research, just as they've not done the research before they say stay in. And thus, we can sleepwalk into this staying in the EU simply through mutual ignorance. The way to break that is in the time that people have left. Go onto YouTube, put the relevant words in, go onto the internet, put the relevant words in, and look at the background, the documentaries, the documented evidence that this EU is a tyranny from the start. And someone who absolutely knew that and was fundamental even before he became Prime Minister in bringing about our entry in the early 70s was Ted Heath. Don't start me on Ted Heath in all the other things he was involved in. But what was happening, because this is another point about this regionalization. The plan from the start, provable fact, was that not only Europe was going to be broken up into regions, but the regions were going to specialize in certain areas within the total economy. And so the plan was, through this period, this totalitarian tiptoe to getting where they want to go, that those areas or those specializations that were on the original blueprint in certain areas would be emphasized, would be supported, would be brought to prominence. And those parts of the economy which they were still involved in, that weren't going to be the specialization for that area, they would be systematically run down. No one would say why that was happening, but of course the people behind it knew exactly why it was happening. Let me give you an example of that. And this is in my books. This is documentable fact. When Ted Heath was negotiating the entry of Britain into the EEC, as it was, the common market, he agreed to run down Britain's fishing industry and give away exclusivity of our fishing grounds. He agreed to run down mining. He agreed to run down manufacturing industry, because Britain and the regions of Britain, as they are planned to become, were not designated in the original blueprint to specialize in those things. Britain's specialization was going to be finance, with London the center of European finance, and what they call service industries. And I was in a taxi yesterday coming up to this hotel. And the driver said to me, we're obviously talking about the EU, I don't know, Britain's nothing but banks and service industries these days. And I said, I'll explain why. And that's what I've just explained here. And so what we've seen is the destruction of the British fishing industry, because ironically, being an island nation, we were not supposed to specialize in fishing. The rundown of the mining industry, the rundown of manufacturing industry, and it's all systematic. And the irony is if you don't know what the plan is, and I don't believe Margaret Thatcher did, she was supposed to be the Iron Lady. She was one of the most manipulated puppets on a string in British political history. All you had to do was persuade or tell Margaret Thatcher that what you wanted was her idea, and you were fine. And what she did eventually was see that this centralization of power in Europe was getting out of hand. But she was the one, because of a mentality of no regulation, no checks and balances, the free trade, which of course is never free trade. She led the so-called financial Big Bang to be, which opened the city of London to what it is now. And she thought that was a triumph. What it was bringing about the financial center that London is and was designated to be in the blueprint. But she would not have seen that. And then along came, of course, John Major, who is over the years has, shall we say, had a number of positions, not least European head of the Carlyle Group, the Bush company in part out of America, that was very much involved with the Bin Laden family before 9/11. He allowed this massive step in the centralization of power in Europe called the Maastricht Treaty. And when Kenneth Clarke, minister of the time, was asked on the BBC when he was campaigning for Maastricht to be allowed and to happen, if he'd read the Maastricht Treaty and what was in it, he replied no. But these people haven't. And the devil's in the detail. And by the way, when talking of an interview, as a result of the 30-year rule, which makes government papers, which they don't then again stop coming out, but the 30-year rule lets a lot of government papers be made public after 30 years. And when confirmation came some years ago of the true manipulations and negotiations that had gone on in the run-up to Britain coming into the European Union as it is, Ted Heath was asked on a BBC radio program, did you know when you were negotiating Britain's entry that you were agreeing to political union? And his reply, yes, of course. Except that he never told the British people that when he was selling us a free trade area, nothing to worry about, good for jobs. And the same mendacity, the same deceit, the same outrageous hoodwinking of the public is going on now with the lies and the fear-mongering that we've been subject to from the Cameron Osborne camp. And, you know, I said in a recent video that the House of Rothschild have little pockets put into their shirts here so they can put Cameron in one and Osborne in the other. That's the dynamic and relationship between those two and the House of Rothschild. But what has happened is that they have so overcooked the pudding in terms of the ludicrous nature of their lies and their fear-mongering. I mean, I'm waiting for the warning that if we come out, that Godzilla will attack London the following morning. I mean, we're getting into that territory now. They've overcooked the pudding so much that people are just laughing at them. And I do hope deeply that enough people do vote to come out, that the difference in the polls by polling day is such that it will be very difficult to rig the vote. The closer it is, the easier it is to rig. But I would say this, if we come out, if we vote to leave, that's not the end, it's the start. And we're going to need some serious backbone then and stand by our principles. Because you look at the referendums that have voted against what this EU tyranny wanted, not least in Ireland. And what they've done is wait a bit, made things as difficult as possible for the country in question, done more manipulation, and then they've come back and had another referendum which has overturned the first one. Note, when a referendum gives them what they want, they never have another referendum to overturn that. And if we vote to come out, then the political classes in the European Union and in Britain, the Cameron and associated political class, will be doing everything they can to frighten people ongoing into reversing that decision. So this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and we need to be aware of that and not be surprised if we vote to leave that they will be making it as difficult as they can so that we say, oh, please, mummy, daddy, let us come back. We mustn't do that because I think, as you indicated in your introduction, Jason, this is almost certainly the last chance we're going to get of getting out of this tyranny. And this is another point which has been made in a newspaper today by an MEP who is vehemently exposing and against the EU. They are holding back large numbers of things and crucial things like a European army, which I was predicting was coming back in the 1990s, to not frighten people even more into voting leave. And if we vote to stay in, then first of all, they will have to punish the British people for having the temerity to demand a referendum to come out and to have voted in such large numbers to come out, because these people, don't forget, Ireland got punished with what followed those referendums, or that referendum when they voted against what the bureaucracy wanted. And we saw the economic consequences of that. And once we're in, again, and there's no other chance to come out, there's no checks and balances on what the bureaucracy will do then. And so much is going to come in that would horrify people, even horrify large numbers of people who are currently going to vote to stay in. Because they're uninformed about the game, they don't realize what's waiting. So the reason, and I'll conclude with this, the reason that they are using fear to frighten people into staying in is because there is no credible, positive reason to stay in. There is no positive outcome for the people of this country, apart from the elite, of staying in. And that's why there is no positive campaigning by the stay-in camp, because there's nothing positive to say. And if there's nothing positive to say now, there won't be anything positive to say, and then some, very soon after we vote to stay in this bureaucratic tyranny. And not just a bureaucratic tyranny, that's just the face of it. That's just that which you can partly see. It's the hidden hand behind it that uses it as a vehicle to change European society en masse with every law and regulation that it introduces. And we've got an opportunity here now to put two fingers up to the political class of Europe, to the bureaucratic political class of Europe, to the hidden hand behind the bureaucratic and political class of Europe, and assert ourselves. I think they call it freedom.
Bloody wonderful, David. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I got a bit of an echo there, David. Have you got your speaker on there?
I've got a speaker now. Only what I got
a bit of an echo, yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
It'll force me to shut up and get out of it. I've got to. Well, I know we've run out of time for you. Just a quick thing I want to say. Yeah, absolutely great. Spider's web. Once you're in, you ain't gonna get out. It'll eat you alive. And I just want to say a quick thing, very quickly. The chloroform is lifting, and I think struggling, depressed people now in despair are just saying, "We've had enough of your lies. We can see it." And at last, I think the chloroform's lifting and the amnesia is lifting, David. It's very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm going out on this world tour now.
Brilliant.
Next one is at Brixton on Saturday at the O2 Academy at start at 10 o'clock, and it goes on till 10 o'clock at night, actually, because there's so many extraordinary number of dots to connect that put things into context, and thus the EU into context among many other things. It's because I have seen that not only do more and more people open their minds to things they would have rejected by reflex action before, but there's an even vaster number who have come to that point where what is happening in the world is making them feel very uneasy, and they don't like it, and they're wondering what on earth is going on, because I get a real bad feeling about this. Well, in these events like at Brixton, I explain why they get a bad feeling and why they feel uneasy about what's going on, because there is a colossal multi-leveled global conspiracy happening to enslave humanity in a world that would have made even or would make even Orwell wince. And the EU is part of it, but only part of it. There's a vast web that needs to be understood and put into context, and then we've got a chance of doing something about it when we know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, you've got to understand the prison, haven't you? And yeah, people. I say to people, if you know, the feeling of depression and despair, it's a natural response from a healthy body and mind in a system that's killing it, and that's good. It's good that you feel like that. You know. Quick thing before you go, David. Well, I just want to say this about the hospital thing, please, because it's very important. While you're here, you said about they're running the NHS down. I took a very dear loved member of my family into the hospital in Cardiff today before I rushed down the motorway to speak to you. There's people on trolleys, there's no nurses, there's people throwing up, there's people being sick, there's people having heart attacks, there's people lying on benches, and I'm telling you, it's hell on earth. Those people, everyone can see them suffering. It's a sick system, and if Cameron and those people's mums and dads or themselves were going to end up there, it'd never happen. And that, I'm telling you, just to clarify what David said, they are running the NHS down. It is shocking. I've never seen anything like it. People dying there of heart attacks because no one can come and see them, David.
And the psychological game is, well, we better privatize it then. It's not working as it is. That's how it works. And of course, Cameron and Osborne and all these people will never have NHS treatment. They'll be treated by the corporations that they want to take over the NHS and make a fortune from the suffering of others. That's the way it is. But how many people in this country? 63 million, something like that, maybe a few more. How many people run it? Handful.
Yeah,
I think I see a way out. I think I see a way out of this.
Yeah, bravo. And also to say that if people were eating healthily and doing the alternative ways of living, the hospitals would almost be empty, that's for sure. So I'll just show David's book before we go, please. Here we go. Phantom Self and How to Find the real one. And there's David's book. Thank you so much for that, David. Please go and see David in Brixham on Saturday, if there's any tickets left. Thank you, David, for, I know I keep going on and saying thank you. I also got to say sorry to everybody if this David's video might be a little bit fuzzy. I've had some problems here. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea. But David is such a fountain of truth and so handsome anyway. Then it doesn't matter about if it's fuzzy.
You're right, it must be fuzzy.
Brilliant. So thank you so much, David, for joining me. Great luck on Saturday. Thank you for all your fantastic work. You're a wonderful inspiration to me. It keeps me going when I feel tired to think of what you're doing and pulls me onward, believe me. And thank you for all your great work, David. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure, Jason. See you again. Bye.
Thanks, David. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you go. That's David Icke. What an absolute joy, you know. And go and see him on Saturday if you can. Of course, I got to flash my own book up there. Of course I have. The Emergency Transformation of Human Beings before I go. And thank you all very much for joining me on the show. And get David's book, The Phantom Self. David's an amazing inspiration to me. And the truth will set you free, as he says. And one quick thing before I go, I want to say about Michael Portillo, who said to him on the BBC, that this conspiracy laziness to look at conspiracies. This isn't a conspiracy theory, people. It's the truth. What David's talking about is the truth. And like he said, there's a trajectory, a planned trajectory. And if you look where we are only, you won't see what's coming. It's not fear-mongering, it's the truth. So for goodness sake, get informed, see what's going on, and see what you're looking at, you know, what's going on. Okay, so that's me done. I'll just say goodbye to everyone, and thanks so much, David. Thanks for everybody, and thanks David, for helping people who haven't even been born yet. And your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, will benefit from what David's talking about. So thanks very much. Bye bye.